What's happening, guys? Welcome back. So in my videos I talk a lot about the things I do in IT and the people I deal with day to day and the projects we work on and what we sort of do to go through the day and going through the motions of the day. But I think I drop a lot of names and job titles of maybe some roles in the IT world that I assume that you guys have heard of, but maybe you haven't. So one of the things I'd love to discuss with you is the difference between a few different roles that I talk a lot about. So when we talk about project space and the engineering space, I drop a lot of terms. So I think it's a good idea if we go through some of the roles. So I'll go with 3 roles today, and we'll go through what that person usually does and how they do it and what they do on a day-to-day basis and how they fit into the IT field. So the roles we're going to go through a system engineer role, which sometimes is called a Wintel role, or we'll sort of use the term interchangeably with like a Linux engineer, a Windows engineer, system engineer, something like that. So someone who is on the tools most of the day. We'll also go through what we would call a project engineer or a professional services engineer, basically someone who is a system engineer but works in the project space, not really in the BAU space. And then I'll go through the architect role, so what the architect role does and how that person sort of comes into play when we're talking about projects and BAU, etc. If you are interested in some of the different types of roles that I've had and some of the different experience I've had in the IT field, then click on the video card above. I'll put it up here or up here, whichever side it lands on, and have a look at that video. I'll go through all of the roles that I've had in the past 10 years and what I've done in those roles, and maybe it might give you some ideas and maybe put you along the right path. As usual, if you are getting some value out of these videos and you think you'd like to see more, then subscribe. And if you like this video, then hit the like button. So let's start with system engineer. So system engineer, we sort of use the term interchangeably with a Wintel engineer, a Linux engineer, sometimes system administrator or sysadmins. We sort of use that term a lot. It sort of just means that we're referring to a BAU person. So someone who's on the tools all day, doing things like touching file servers and DHCP servers and DNS and Active Directory and file and print servers, all those sort of things. Those are the type of things that the BAU guys usually do, and we call them a system engineer. That person may have many different types of environments that they're responsible for, especially if you're working at an MSP. So if you're working at an MSP, you might have 2 or 3 clients and you're the system engineer or the system administrator on all 3 clients. Usually the system engineer will have a very strong expertise in one type of operating system like Windows or Linux or something like that. And then generally they all have very good experience with Active Directory and Microsoft Windows servers. Even most of the Linux engineers a lot of the time have a lot of Windows Server experience, and that's just because you can't get away from Windows servers when you're working in a IT space. Basically, a system engineer's role is to keep an environment operational, so making sure that the client or that the person's organization where they work, making sure that their environment is actually running well kept, so the backups are running, DR is getting tested every now and then, and all the environment is generally healthy. That person will usually be responsible for monitoring and things like that. All of those things sort of go hand in hand. So just making sure that the environment is available for everyone to be working in and that there's no service degradation or anything like that. So system engineers are relied on a lot. We sort of, whether you're in the IT space or whether you're in, accounting or marketing or any sort of role in a corporation or an environment or a business environment, you rely on system engineers a lot. They're the people that keep the environment humming along. They're the people that cop all the slack when something's not going so well. They're often asked to go way out of the scope of what their actual role is. So keep that in mind if you're going for that type of role. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. Some people enjoy it, some people don't. And there's a lot of pressure usually when it comes to system engineering roles, because when things aren't working well, there's a lot of pressure on you to get them working well. So I'm going to skip a few roles here, but there's also like senior system engineers and technical leads and sort of more senior type of system engineering roles. That's obviously once you're getting to a stage where you become like the authority on a certain tech stack or environment or something like that, then you usually get promoted to something like a senior or a technical lead or something like that, somewhere where you become sort of everyone's point of contact for a certain environment or certain tech. The next one we're going to touch on is project engineers. So project engineers or professional services engineers, actually drop a comment in the section below and let me know what you actually call this role where you're from. So the people who are project engineers, so someone that's not working on BAU every day, someone that's actual job is to just work on projects, but actually deploying projects, not designing, not consulting, just going in and looking at a high level design and going, okay, we're going to deploy this. Which brings me to what they do day to day. So a project engineer or a professional services engineer, whatever you call them, they are the people that look at a high level design and they go, okay, this is what we have designed and this is what we are going to deploy. These people usually are very well versed in a certain tech stack or a certain environment, and they're the type of people that you go to when you want to deploy something like Microsoft Azure, or if you want to just do everything in AWS, or if you just want to do a massive VMware deployment and that person is very good at VMware, that's the person you'll go to and you'll say, okay, this is what we're deploying. Generally, that person has a lot of experience in that certain stack. So if you go to them with a VMware solution that you want to deliver, they'll usually look at a high level design and they'll be able to tell you what's going to work and what's not going to work because they actually have the experience of going in there. And that person usually comes from a system engineering background and they have a lot of experience in what does and what doesn't work with each other. So what's compatible. So we can, for example, use Veeam backups in VMware. Or if we want to do a Nutanix build, then we need to consider that we need to buy a Nutanix add-on for Veeam. Things like that, those are the type of things that they know, and then they are the people that can actually go in and deploy it so they can take the design and actually turn it into a real life working solution. Project engineers are also under a lot of pressure usually, and it's usually because they are trying to work towards project timelines. So when a project starts, then sometimes we get a lot of hard deadlines and we need to meet those deadlines to make sure that, you know, customers aren't paying in their old environment or something like that. But the main thing is that we really need to meet deadlines. So they're usually under a lot of pressure to get the solutions built within that time frame, and they're also under a lot of pressure to build environments with the least type of impact or disruption to the rest of the environment. So a project engineer will usually consider the current environment very thoroughly before they do any changes, and that's because they need to determine what and what isn't going to have an impact on the BAU operations of the business. Okay, architects. So there is a few different types of architects. We have solution architects, we have application architects, we have enterprise architects. Let's try and touch on a bit of all of them. Basically, an architect is the person who goes in to meet a customer. So they usually double as a consultant. They usually go in to meet a customer and design a solution to meet a customer's requirements. So the person will go in and they'll have enough knowledge about a certain technical stack or a certain type of environment that they'll be able to go to a customer and ask the right questions in order to develop the correct solution to meet the problem that they have. That's what an architect is really. So they are there to sort of build a design around a solution that they want to deploy. Usually a solution architect will have a very deep understanding in a few types of tech. So mine, for example, I have a good understanding in Microsoft Azure and I'm able to deploy solutions or design solutions in Microsoft Azure to meet customers' requirements. Once the solution architect has put together a high-level design, they are often the person who actually builds a low-level design, so a detailed design to actually take to the customer, one that actually stipulates all their requirements and how that solution meets it. And once that's signed off, that is the design that will be passed on to the project engineers, which I mentioned before, that will actually deploy the solution. So in my experience, a solution architect that has a background of deployment, so someone who has been a project engineer in the past or maybe even a system engineer in the past, those are the type of people that can build a very good solution because they have the experience of what does and what doesn't work. So a solution architect, there is many different types of architects. One of them I mentioned, may or may not have mentioned before, is a pre-sales architect. Those people generally aren't always technical. So there's different types of architects. Another one that we should touch on is an enterprise architect. That person sometimes doesn't have a very deep knowledge of a certain tech, although they often do, but they don't have to have a deep knowledge of a certain tech stack. Their job is to actually look at an organization holistically so that they can make decisions or help the customer make decisions about their IT operations and about their IT hardware, infrastructure, etc., on how we can actually keep the business moving forward and how it can actually add value to the business and meet all the requirements. So things like compliance and governance and cybersecurity. That's the type of thing that an enterprise architect would be looking at, and their job is to make sure that the customer is meeting all of those requirements and that the customer is actually moving towards a certain goal. Generally, an enterprise architect just has to have a very strong understanding of how business and IT actually operate together and how IT can help a business grow and continue to sort of make money. I hope that was helpful. I hope that helps you make a decision if you're looking to move into one of those roles, or if you're sort of aspiring to get into one of those roles. Good luck if you are. It is a very difficult industry to crack, but once you crack it, I think you can have a lot of fulfillment and a lot of enjoyment in the role if you like what you're doing. As usual, if you liked the video, smash the like button, subscribe for more, and we'll see you next time.